times kind of suck right now, but that is what it is. I also know people that are absolutely crushing it, that are making boatloads of money. And a big reason is because most of the industry has left. What's going on, guys? Welcome to today's episode of the Collecting Keys Real Estate Investing Podcast. We are, listening to this after Thanksgiving, but we recorded this during the Thanksgiving week. And so due to scheduling, family, commitments, whatever, we didn't have a chance to record as our normal little group. And so you're stuck with a solo episode with me today. This is your first time here. My name is Mike DeHaan. I'm the typical main host of the show. And Dylan and Dan, they were doing stuff this week. And so got a little deep dive into a blast from the past with another sort of like Friday focus style of episode with just me. And so you've been listening for a while. I used to do these sort of like single solo episodes once a week. Stopped doing this a little while ago. And so it's been a little bit. So if I'm rusty, I apologize. But anyway, I'm going to dive into a little bit of a topic that has been sort of a recurring theme. And people that have asked me questions on Instagram, or even just people in sort of my general circle around specifically quitting real estate and quitting your job. Quitting real estate and quitting your business, and kind of like why people do that. Is this a good time to do that with how the real estate market is? And I think I've been getting asked this a lot for two main reasons. One, first off, if you are new to the show, Dan and I, we actually sold our wholesaling and flipping business at the beginning of October. And so we have basically left that game to focus primarily on our private money and hard money lending business, Sir Lends-A-Lot, or SLA Capital. And then also two, just because of the economy, we're seeing a pretty big influx of people that are kind of leaving the off-market real estate wholesaling and flipping industry, both just kind of in a macro level on social media, you're seeing it a lot, but also in our small little scale group, we are seeing people that have been reasonably successful over the past few years that are exiting to go and do other things. And so a recurring question has been, should they be considered the same? What are kind of like the things that you consider when doing that? And so I figured for the sake of this episode, it would be just an interesting conversation to have, to sort of like dive down to what it looks like to leave the real estate industry and when you should do that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically focus on like when you shouldn't quit, like when you're probably doing a little bit preemptively, when you should quit, and sort of like the signs you can look for. And then if you do decide to quit the real estate industry, kind of like how to do that and the ways to approach it so that you're successful in your next endeavor. And so kind of the three different phases we're going to talk about today is those who shouldn't quit, those who should, and how exactly to do it if you decide to take the leap. And I'll kind of just point out a few different patterns that I see here and there on people that kind of go one way or the other and give you my opinion on them. And so first off, we'll start with people who shouldn't quit their real estate business, which I would say, honestly, most people fall into this. They just maybe are a little bit impatient with the way that things are going. And so people that shouldn't quit their business, I would say the number one people that are probably considering it that probably shouldn't do it are like newbies, right? So people that have just started, dipping their toes in real estate, they're brand new to it, and they're considering quitting because it's hard. They're not getting anywhere as fast as they could, as fast as they feel like they should. And to those people, I hate to break it to you, but this is what being a business owner feels like. If you were like new in the phases of real estate, you probably shouldn't leave it unless you've been fully committed. And I mean like full time, not like you're doing an hour a day or, you listen to podcasts and you're sort of like looking for deals. That doesn't count as being a real estate business owner. But if you are full on into it and it's been like 2 years and you really, really find yourself struggling, and maybe consider it. But otherwise, if you're like a newbie who's kind of just trying to figure it out, stick with it because you haven't actually developed any skills you're going to translate to anything else. And if you go and try to go to some other kind of business, you're going to fail as well. You're going to struggle. It's going to be exactly the same. Okay. And so those people shouldn't quit. Also, people who have been running their businesses like amateurs over the last little while. And so I'm talking about people that kind of have like bad habits around their business, people that aren't using their CRM correctly, aren't tracking their KPIs, aren't hiring out and delegating the parts of the business that are repetitive and take a lot of their time, people that are spending their Fridays and Wednesday afternoons playing golf instead of working and then are just complaining they're not making more money. All those kind of people probably shouldn't quit because honestly, dude, you're kind of treating your business like I don't say like a loser, but you're doing it poorly, right? You're not being a professional business owner. Those are like the same kind of people as the ones who complain that they never lose weight, but then they only go to the gym twice a week. They skip their extra sessions with their trainer that they booked, and then they, eat a bunch of junk food and stuff on the weekends. Like, yeah, no shit. You're only going in like halfway there, so you're not going to get the results that you want. Same sort of principles apply to business, right? And then the last sort of bucket of people that probably shouldn't quit are people that just generally are looking around and have FOMO of the quote unquote other success that they're seeing people having, whether that's, you're down the rabbit hole like the Cody Sanchez and buying other businesses. You hear us kind of hit on that whole fad a lot. Whether it's people that are like looking at crypto or trading stocks or just like starting up, I don't know, something e-commerce, whatever. If you are looking around and you just feel like other people have it easier than you need to look at it from more of a honest perspective, right? Is like, A, are those people actually successful? And, they are doing something that you're not and that you don't know. Or B, do they kind of just have the experience that you have in real estate and it just happens to be a slightly better time for that kind of business, right? And both those options are probably true. But the thing is, if you're acting out of FOMO, you'll probably switch over there and you'll struggle. And so it kind of just goes like, stick with what you know, right? And ultimately, a big Alex Hormozi quote that I like is that business is a game, isn't a game of best man wins, it's last man standing. And that can apply to this scenario. Exactly, right? And so those are kind of people who shouldn't quit. Newbies, people who aren't running the businesses very well, people with FOMO, right? So you fall into those camps, kind of just stay where you're at. Maybe analyze your business, see what you can do better, and focus on how to sort of grow and expand your business, and then go from there. Now, for people who should quit, like Dan and I did, right? We did decide to make a pivot, but we fall pretty firmly into the first sort of category here of people that should consider quitting their businesses. And for us, that was, we had a 100% confirmed option that was better aligned with kind of where we wanted to go. And that we already knew had more potential because we had already been growing it, right? And so for us, with our lending business, we've been lending for 3 years, and we had started hiring staff and building assistants at the beginning of this year. And that business was growing at a rate that just massively was starting to outpace our real estate business with its current state. And the upside seems so much higher. And not only that, but just with us being like a little bit burned out of dealing with crazy sellers, deals going sideways, the buyer struggles, spending the marketing, all that sort of stuff. It just made sense for us to sort of go down this path. Okay. And so when we quote unquote quit, it wasn't like we were quitting and starting over. We were basically just stepping away from something that was reasonably successful and going full force into something that we knew had legs. And so if you're going to if you are in that same situation, I would definitely, consider if you have something lined up. But if you don't really have a confirmed option, maybe wait a little bit, right? Second sort of people that should look at quitting will be people that are super over leveraged or have had some major losses. I know it sucks to go out when you're behind, but sometimes that is the responsible thing to do, especially in some of these markets right now, Florida, Texas, some of these markets where people are really, really far behind. If you are to the point now where you have used your HELOC on your home, you've used up your cash, your family's livelihood is getting a little bit dicey, it probably makes sense to throw in the towel, stop spending money on marketing, stop trying to earn your way back, and just figure out how to deal with the challenges that you're currently facing, right? Not doing that is kind of the same as if you're at a casino and you're playing blackjack and you lose, you're down $1,000. You keep gambling and trying to win your money back? It's no, you don't. You have more control in business, sure, but also you kind of need to be realistic if you look at the big picture of the economy and what situations look like. How much more risk are you willing to take on and try and dig yourself out? And if it's a situation where you're honest with yourself and you are really far behind, it probably makes sense to either pause, go do something else, go get a job, even though that sucks. Sometimes that is the best option for people. Go back to a W-2 and just do anything different, because especially with real estate, it is a debt-heavy, risk-heavy business. And sometimes it makes sense just to walk away from that, okay? The third people are, if you look at kind of the big picture of who you are and where you're at, and let's say you've been doing this business for a while, and honestly, you just realize that you aren't as good as you thought you were. And it seems like kind of a weird one, but we've gotten to see quite a few people like this over the past couple of years that absolutely crushed it in 2020 and 2021. They were heavily boosted by the economy and how real estate was that period of time. And now stuff has gotten harder. They found it harder to keep up with the systems, to keep up with the hiring, keep up with everything that they need to learn and maintain that sort of knowledge they need to maintain around transactions, different strategies to keep a competitive advantage. And there are people that just look around and go, you know what, I actually don't think I'm that good at this. I'm not good at like compiling the data or running a sales team or being able to analyze like the macro trends to make the best sort of decisions with my business. And if that's you, it might make sense to go and do something different or to just scale down, right? And just focus on being a business for a little while that maybe does a handful of deals a year, make them bigger deals. Like don't try to like grow a business quite as aggressively. And that's always a hard thing for people to admit. But if you're able to look at your metrics, if you like are constantly looking around and trying to figure out what other people are doing and you realize that you were just falling behind, maybe it is time to go and do something else. Okay. And so those are the people that potentially should move away from it. And so like, let's say you fall into that bucket. The next question comes down to how exactly do you go about it, right? How do you actually pull away from real estate, especially if it's been a big part of your identity? This honestly was a big thing for us. Was we have this podcast, we have this brand, we have this whole community that we ran. Dan and I had been doing that real estate business together for 6 years, 2019. Yeah. So solid 6 years, right? It was a very difficult thing for us to do kind of because it was ingrained in who we were. And so if you are going to step away, you kind of want to make sure you're doing it the correct way so you don't, I don't know, suffer an identity crisis or sort of burn all your bridges, right? You know, or go into a position where you're just equally as unhappy or equally struggling. And so if you are going to quit, I think the first and most important thing is you go into something that actually does like fire you up and that you're excited about. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is they leave one business to go to another business purely because they think it's another it's a better opportunity when they're not that excited about it, right? Like if you are a tangible sort of asset guy and you're really into, you know, real estate and doing renovations and all this sort of stuff, and you try to go into doing what we're doing, where we're basically just trading paper and generating debt, it's probably not going to be that fulfilling because you are losing all of the, like, all of the actual tangible nature of real estate is in the asset, right? And all of a sudden, if you just go to like kind of like the digital world, you're probably not going to like it as much. Same with if you were like a real estate sort of like trades guy, and all of a sudden you decide you're going to go and try and acquire a SaaS business or like run an accounting firm or something just because some friend that you had made a bunch of money doing that, you're probably not going to make it because you likely just won't be as excited. It can be so far removed from what you've already been doing. And so if you are going to make the leap, make sure you're pumped about it, right? And if you don't know what that is, let's say you were in the camp of you're leaving because you're cutting your losses, spend some time to find that thing before you go all in on it, right? And don't just chase an opportunity, but chase something that actually will get you going and get you excited to start working again. Okay. Second thing is when you're going to quit, I always really encourage people, and this is kind of along the same lines, but make sure that you leave and go into a business that's like somewhat similar, right? So like if you are leaving the real estate business and you decide you're going to go into like e-commerce for, I don't know, Lego, drop shipping, some kind of product, it's going to be a much harder transition. You're going to be starting from a much earlier phase than you're probably used to, especially if you've been a real estate business owner for a while. And that can be really, really hard. And you probably go back to that phase of like, you're losing a lot of money. You have a really major learning curve. You're really kind of on the struggle bus for a while. And unless you crave that, I typically recommend you don't do that. And so things that are very good sort of tangent businesses to real estate, you know, lending. That's why I went to it. Things like title companies, things like contracting companies, different trades. I know people that have left the house flipping game and have gone and just taken their crews and just started doing renovations for people that are like homeowners, right? A landscaping company, fence building company, stuff like that. Those are very, very good businesses where you have the same general skills. And especially if you've been a direct to seller real estate investor, which for listen to us, you probably have a lot of those skills around direct mail, around cold calling, around door knocking, around how to analyze opportunities. They're very, very similar in a lot of those home services businesses, right? And so focusing on some of those, I think can be a good tangent opportunity. But don't go and like try to do something that's completely out of left field just because it seems like a better opportunity, right? And if you do something that's kind of along the same lines, it will be a much smoother transition. You'll no doubt be successful. So really make sure you consider that when you're making the leap. And then the last sort of thing I want you to make sure you consider when you're going to quit is whatever you do, you got to make sure that you go all in with it and you're prepared to work, right? I think one of the biggest mistakes people tend to make is they shut down a business, they go into something else and they treat it like a startup again. They go back to like the days when they first started their real estate business where they're kind of just like clicking around, trying CRMs, they're going to coffee meetings. They kind of like have their toes in. They're afraid to spend any money on anything. That's a giant waste of time. And if you've had any sort of success in your real estate business, you're doing yourself a disservice as a business owner and as an entrepreneur by not going all in and being willing to invest in yourself, invest in your business, hire staff, build systems, and you should be able to scale relatively quickly. It's not uncommon for people to, that have had some sort of successful business, say they run $1 million a year in their real estate business, and it took them 2 years to do that. If you go into a new business, you kind of know what you're doing from the ground up. You can build a more solid base. You can build systems and hire staff earlier. You'll probably get to that same size of business in like a few months, honestly, maybe 6 months, right? And even like faster than that, and you'll start to find that the ceiling is much higher because you're not constantly like padding things on to a business that was already kind of fractured, and you're bringing that experience from that first business that you're leaving into something else, and you're able to scale it a little bit more soundly, right? With a little more strategy. And so if you are making the leap, leave real estate altogether, right? I still get people asking me all the time, like, well, would you still flip a house if one came across and you liked it? And no, I wouldn't, because that's going to distract me from the lending business that I'm fully focused on, right? I'm not buying rentals anymore. I'm not flipping houses. I'm not wholesaling anything. Even if these different opportunities pop up, and they actually have over the last few months, I just don't care because I'm all in on the lending business, right? And I think if you want to be successful, you kind of have to do the same thing. And if you are kind of trying to hold on to that real estate identity, you'll never really do anything with it. Okay. You'll never like quite be able to grow out of it and move on to the next thing. Like if you're going to do that, just stay in real estate. Yeah, times kind of suck right now, but that is what it is. I also know people that are absolutely crushing it, that are making boatloads of money. And a big reason is because most of the industry has left. Okay. And that's okay. You just gotta, compete with those people, or be okay just kind of, being a little bit smaller for the next little while and wait for the next wave to come. But, and it's kind of like my view on if you should leave, what it should look like, the sort of things that I considered, I guess, as we were starting to make the leap. Ultimately for Dan and I, like the biggest thing, I see Dan and I, we put us in a box. The biggest thing for me with walking away is I've said from the very beginning that wholesaling and flipping houses and buying rentals was a means to an end. And so when I started in that business, honestly, before I started working with Dan back in 2018, my goal was to be able to make enough money so that I could kind of do what I wanted. And wholesaling and flipping houses is an awesome business for that. Like as a very lean operation, you can make several $100,000 a year. You can buy discounted assets that build wealth. You can do all kinds of different things. Yes, it has downside risk, but it also has a lot of upside that is asymmetrical for the amount of effort that it takes, honestly, compared to other businesses. And so that was my goal, was to be able to make enough money, build enough of a knowledge base to be able to do something else. And that's what I did. And so when I got into 2025, honestly, at the beginning of the year, Dan and I, we shut down our national wholesaling company, and we kept doing it local, primarily because we had a couple other partners that wanted to run it with us. And so our plan the entire time was to basically provide them the back end. They would do a lot of the front end. Turned out that we weren't very good culture fits together. And so Dan and I decided to end that relationship. But on the side, we had been building the lending business because I had identified that as something that I was excited about. I liked the opportunity that was there. I liked the ability to have cash flow plus major upside potential. Plus the industry is huge. So there is a huge ceiling, right? And there's a ton of different people around it. And so that was what I decided to take the money that I made in real estate and apply it towards. And wouldn't you know it, we have grown extremely rapidly this year. We're already churning out regular months that are larger than a lot of our regular months have been in the real estate business over the years in terms of revenue. We haven't even started to feel like we reached the ceiling yet. And so because we were able to come in, apply this money right away, apply the skill set right away, we've been able to identify an opportunity that much more better aligns what we want to do. And so when it came to the real estate stuff, I was so honestly removed from that anyway, that it was a relief to be able to finally pull the plug. And I would say the reason I kind of kept with it for most of 2025 was because I didn't really have proof of concept for the lending yet. We hadn't really scaled it. And also it was a big part of my identity with having the show and everything else that I'd done. Okay. So anyways, guys, hope you found it interesting. If you are considering leaving the industry, I'd love to hear about your reasons why. You can message me on Instagram at Mike_invests. Shoot me a note there. I always like chatting with people. And thanks for listening, guys. And I hope you had a great holiday. And we'll talk to you guys next week. This episode is sponsored by Sir Lancelot LLC, also known as SLA Capital, which, if you didn't know, is Dan and I's private lending company. So yes, we are sponsoring our own show, but what you going to do about it? It is our private lending company that offers hard money and DSCR loans to real estate investors of all types. So you can be a new investor, an experienced investor. You can be buying flips. You can be buying rentals, whatever. We can do everything. And not only that, but the rates that we offer are just as competitive, if not cheaper, than pretty much every other company out there. So whatever big company you've been working with, bring us their term sheets and I guarantee you that we can probably beat it. We have the same connections they do. We just don't have all the overhead and middlemen. So if you want to come and check us out, go to slacapital.com/keys and I will know that you came from the show. And by seeing that you came from here, when you get to closing, you will save $500 on your first loan with us. So slacapital.com/keys, we would love to fund your next deal.